Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to the show, Indestructible Souls. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for continued support. My name is Jonathan Beauregard. I am your host of Indestructible Souls, the podcast for mental wellness for African American men and boys. Today, I have a wonderful show. At least I hope it's wonderful. It's sort of a spinoff of our last two shows, which was where, where we clearly talked about being held emotionally hostage within a relationship. Many times people may ask, well, what does this have to do with African American men and boys? Well, most of us are live day to day, whether it's in intimate relationships, relationships with our parents, obviously intimate relationships, and a lot of things happen in relationships, whether it's male or female, and we wonder why sometimes our relationships don't work. We wonder why we feel stuck or unhappy in relationships. And oftentimes we use terms like toxic relationships and things like that, and maybe not fully understand what that means or what it looks like. So if we're ever going to fix these things, whether it's intimate relationships, friendships, whatever it may be, we have to talk about those things. But before we get into it, I wanted to give my 2 cents on the Chris Rock Will Smith um, debacle. Well, I'm fans of both of them, and in no way, shape, form, or fashion do I agree with Will Smith did. And I know in my day, you know, as my mom would say, I'm gonna slap fire out of you. I'd have slapped fire out of people for less. So no judgment there. Should he have done it at the Oscars? Absolutely not. I feel bad for Chris Rock simply because he was put in a position to where he couldn't defend himself. And yes, he could have, but what happened was so shocking. He was in a position that he could not defend himself. Not to mention, he's never talked about himself being a tough guy. And we all, people who follow these different people as fans, we always, we learn that, he experienced trauma being bullied and things like that. And so here it is, this guy being bullied for the world to see. Now, let me give my professional analysis of what I saw. This is just for shits and giggles, right? And, people talk about, Will Smith was laughing, Jada was laughing. And we know in 2016, they boycotted the Oscars for the Oscars being too white. Okay. Not to mention Chris Rock said that joke about Jada, about, Rihanna saying, you know, Jada boycotting the Grammys is like him boycotting Rihanna's pennies. In essence, he wasn't invited, so she wasn't invited. So how can you boycott something that you weren't invited to? Do I think that that was at the forefront of their mind? Absolutely. Do I think that they were going along with it or going along with the night simply because Will had been nominated for Best Actor? And if you look at it, they're laughing, but you could tell that they were going along with the moment. They were trying to be present in the moment. Now, here's my opinion. When you look at Will Smith and you start hearing things about, and you see all the things that Jada has did to him over the years by what they say emasculating him and entanglements and all that stuff, you heard it here first. It's time for Will to leave Jada. She put that battery in his back, and I'm not saying that she's responsible solely. However, she continues to put this man in a compromising position to either challenge, test, or to make him prove his manhood. And so all the things that he's been through and drugged through the media, I don't think there's no coming back for him as an actor, yes, but as someone people look to as a model, family man, and all that stuff. Absolutely not. It's time for him to leave jail. And that's my take on it. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Should he have done it? No. There's a dozen other ways he could have handled it. But I think with his trauma and what Jada put him through, I think in that moment, he got caught up in the moment. Even when he walked up on stage, I don't think the intent was to slap Chris. And he got up there and didn't know what to do. So that's my opinion. So today, whether you like it or not, I like it. So today, we're going to talk about a very important topic when it comes to relationships. Now, here's the thing. Oftentimes, a lot of us find ourselves in relationships with very loving but difficult people. And sometimes people wonder if they're even in relationship with narcissistic people. Now, all of us have researched that sometime or wonder what's exactly a narcissist, right? Well, some people, just to break it down, some people, their behaviors based off of, or their personalities, but their behaviors particularly based off of being self-centered and all that kind of stuff, can have narcissistic, what we say, tendencies or narcissistic characteristics. Then there's other people who have what we call a narcissistic personality disorder. Now, just real quickly, people with personality disorders, there's no cure for people with personality disorders. People with personality disorders can get better once they recognize the disorder and they learn new skills to deal with the disorder, the personality disorder, but that's who they are. So they can get better, but you can't change who they are. Now, other people who are narcissistic may have narcissistic traits simply because of whatever personality or whatever characteristics and things like that that they developed over time. But today I'm going to talk about trauma bonding. Now, here what I mean by it. And there's different types of trauma bonds. However, I'm going to talk about the ones specifically in relationships. Why is this important? Now, granted, a part of my license says licensed marriage and family therapist. So a lot of times people think that we specialize as LMFTs, we specialize in marriage counseling, where that's not necessarily the case. For California, that's just the title. We're psychotherapists. We do therapy for a lot of different things. Some people may specialize in marriage counseling as their passion or whatever it may be. But I get a lot of people who come to therapy in a relationship that on the surface, they feel like they know they should leave or they know the relationship is unhealthy, but for whatever reason, struggle to leave. But more importantly, the bigger piece of that is they know that they're constantly being abused verbally, emotionally, sometimes physically, and wonder why they can't leave. Here's the kicker. A lot of times people who are in a trauma bonded relationship mistake, and this is both male and female, mistake the trauma and the toxicity that they display in relationships, mistake that as love and struggle to leave. So I'm going to break some things down real quick. And first off, by defining what is being trauma bonded, right? What is that? Now let me try to break it down real quick. I don't want to go like I'm not too big on definitions. I want to give you concepts so we can get into the breakdown of it. However, so are you in a trauma bonded relationship? Or is it the trauma that's bonding you to the relationship? So here's what I mean. So oftentimes people who experience trauma or who are survivors of trauma understand that they're connected to that event probably for the rest of their life, emotionally and mentally. So what happens in a relationship, the problem with a trauma bonded relationship is that everything isn't all so bad. The person that is traumatizing you, if you will, is also the person that's showing you love. They're caring, they're romantic, they're thoughtful, they're giving, they're supportive, and all of these things. So we begin to form an attachment to a person and to what's good about a person. Then over time, whether it starts small and gradually grows, over time, what happens is here comes this abusive behavior or this toxic behavior, and it can come through sometimes physical abuse, it could come through verbal abuse, it could come through um, the threat of abuse, it could come through threat of abandonment. And so what happens is the same person or the same relationship that brings you so much joy is also the same relationship that tears you down and that becomes abusive, right? And so what begins to happen is in abusive relationships, they escalate over time, and using these same emotions and coping skills, they have a long-term damaging effect because you have a mixture of loving, caring, kindness that's also being damaged by abusive behavior. And I'm using abusive behavior in a broad sense. Name calling, cursing, being demanding, breaking down of self confidence, breaking down of self esteem, um, obligating people to do things they don't want to do, right? And so what happens over time, this relationship is what we call becomes toxic, right? One day you're in love, the next day you're fighting. One day you can't stand them or you can't stand her, then the next thing, you're walking down the park holding hands. And so what happens, a cycle begins to form between a cycle of abuse and a cycle of non-abuse. That's when things are good, right? But then here comes this roller coaster and this unpredictable cycle of emotional mental abuse. Now here's an example, right? So when you take, for example, our parents, right? So our parents, they're naturally the first people that take care of us, they love on us, they teach us, and so forth, right? So naturally, we form a bond and an attachment with our caregivers because of the nurturing nature. Now imagine what that does to our psyche. Here it is, this person who tells me that they love me, but then now that exact same person that says they love me turn around and abuse me. Can you imagine the mental tug of war, the mental confusion that this causes? On one hand, I see this hero, then on the other hand, I see this other person that continually tears me down. So when we begin to see these type of relationships, what happens is it's the trauma, believe it or not. It's not the love, it's the trauma that keeps us together. It's the trauma that keeps us stuck. Now, let's get into this. So let's ask yourself, are you in a trauma bonded relationship? Yet again, this will be a two-parter, right? Why is being recognizing if I'm in a trauma bonded relationship so important? The reason why this is so important, yet again, I believe as a therapist, this is what I see mostly when couples come to me, male or female, and they're struggling to decide what to do with a relationship, whether they should leave or stay, or whether they should work on the relationship. Part of the problem is I see often is there's only one person working on the relationship, meaning you got one person in therapy or getting help while the other person continues the same behavior. So it's very difficult to really make progress. But I want people to understand why, especially for those of us on the outside looking in, why does this person stay? Right? Why does this person stay? Well, it's hard to leave these type of relationships. Yet again, the ties and the bounds are mental. The ties and the bounds are emotional. Those relationships are the hardest ones to break away from. Now, are you in a trauma bonded relationship? Let's really break that down real quick. I'm gonna ask some questions. Here's the thing. You might be in a trauma bonded relationship if you already know your partner or ex is abusive, manipulative, but you're not able to quite let them go. You know these things, they're abusive, they're manipulative, but no matter what anybody says, and even when you see it yourself, you struggle to let go. Here's another one. You're probably in a trauma bonded relationship if you constantly have to walk on eggshells in an attempt to appease or please the person you're in a relationship with. We never know when the landmines are. So we have to constantly walk on eggshells. We have to constantly, I love to use the term perform. The reason why I use the term perform is because we're not in our natural state. And so therefore, we got to walk on eggshells to appease and keep our abuser or the person we're in a relationship happy. Here's a big one, and I see this often. So one of the things, let me say this, one of the things as a therapist, we very rarely, unless there's a safety issue, we very rarely tell a person they need to leave. One of the things we do is we check for safety. Are you safe? Are the kids safe? Or whatnot. Now here's the thing. One of the things you probably never catch me doing, but most well-trained therapists is they will never bad talk the person you come in here trying to make things better with, or your abuser, or whatever. We won't. Here's why. People in a trauma bonded relationship find themselves defending their abuser. And here's the other thing, keep their behavior a secret. So what happens is if someone comes in here, male or female, and says, this is what's happening to me in this relationship, and this could even be a child-parent relationship, this is what's happening to me. So even us as therapists, we won't bad talk that person because guess what's going to happen? You're going to begin to defend them. And then also what I find is people will come back to me weeks later, months later and say, guess what? I forgot to tell you this. So I literally had a client that was in services. She came about a relationship, left for months, came back and said, I never told you he was hitting on me the first time around. And guess what? Even then, I still didn't talk about it. Here's another one that you might be going through, and could be that you're in a trauma bonded relationship. If you attempt to leave, you find that your abuser has fake remorse and promises to do things that you know they won't do or have never done. Here's a big one. Here's a huge one. You're probably in a trauma bonded relationship if you develop self-sabotaging behaviors. I see people get just right there. and things start to look up, and things begin to look better and feel better, and they self-sabotage. Here's another one. Here's a huge one, very huge. You start to lower your standards, specifically to make you start to lower your standards for this toxic person, because here's the thing, and I tell people this all the time. A lot of times spouses don't want their significant other to come to therapy, because if the person goes to therapy and happens to get better, they know that's the end of the relationship. So what happens is, because people feel so sorry for their abuser, what happens is they begin to lower their own standards, because now it begins to make sense for me to be here. Because if I keep my standards up here, it doesn't make sense for me to be in a relationship. But if I lower my standards, if I lower myself, now I fit into the box of the abuse. Does that make sense? So now, here's the other thing. You're probably in a trauma bonded relationship if you change your behavior and personality in an attempt to meet the abuser's standard. Here's the thing. Here's what I mean by standard, meet their standard. Is you begin to change to fit into their box. You begin to change to fit into their idea of you. So in reality, I hear people a lot of times, I lost myself. I'm no longer myself because I changed so much to fit into that person's box. So now ask yourself, here's the thing, ask yourself, do you fit into the any of these? Have you experienced this? Do you know people who are currently in this type of situation? So today, like I said, today is part one, and we're going to get into the rest of it next week. But I want to go through real quickly another couple of aspects. Here's the thing. When we talk about what's love in a relationship, and we've all said things that are cliche, love's not supposed to hurt. Yeah, maybe sometimes, right? Nothing's perfect. But when we talk about being in a toxic relationship, it is disheartening to see people in situations to where you can see what's better for them. They can't see it themselves, but it's so hard to break away from it because they are being abused, and it's not even daily, or they're engaged in a toxic relationship or a trauma bonded relationship and can't see it. And then they mistake these intense feelings of trauma, mistake them for love. Yeah, and here's the thing. So let's go over this quickly. As you can see, the 7 stages that lead to becoming in a trauma bonded relationship. Let's go over them real quickly. And by all means, if you ever have questions about this stuff or you want to discuss them further in detail, you can always send me an email at Jonathan at Beauregardtherapy.com, or you can send me a message on one of the platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or whatever. So stage one of becoming where you're probably in a trauma bonded situation or on your way there. So here's one, and I see this happen all the time. It's what we call love bombing. Real quick. Basically, what love bombing is that you get all the love, you get all of the things you ever wanted, and the validation, you get the attention, the affection, and then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you just constantly showered with love, right? Okay, people want that. And then next thing you know, okay, things are good, I'm feeling good, this relationship feels good, and then guess what happens after that, right? Now you begin to trust. Now you begin to develop a dependency on that person. Here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with trust, but when we get into that part of dependency, then we're going down a slippery slope. We begin to believe that they're going to love us no matter what, right? And then next thing you know, we begin to depend on their validation. We begin to depend on the things that they tell us and the things that they promised us. Now, guess what happens after that? Gradually, after we got the love, we got the trust, we got the dependency, now here comes the criticism. The validation becomes based on what you do for me. So after the criticism, where we talk about stage 4, here comes the gaslighting. We talked about all of that, right? So a lot of us know what gaslighting is. I'm not going to go into it too much, look it up. But here, the gaslighting where things aren't as honest as they say, right? Or one of the things is making you believe that you're crazy, making you believe that you're wrong, and then here comes the gaslighting. And all of a sudden, everything's your fault. Here we are with stage 5. Now, after the gaslighting, the abuser begins to take control. So, what do I mean by that? You're so worried with making them happy and getting that love again. Now this person is in control or do things. So therefore you're longing for that love and you're longing for that validation. And then now you will do things, whatever this person wants you to do in order to get that acceptance. Stage 6, because you've done these things, you begin to lose a sense of self. This is a huge one. You don't know what's right for you. You don't know how to make decisions. You do things or you don't do things you want to do or don't want to do because you have to please the other person. So what happens is you begin to lose a sense of self. And then here's the last one. So you then lost the sense of self. So now you rely on this person to even tell you how you feel about yourself, what you think about yourself. And then you get to a point where you almost feel like you're addicted to this person, that you have to have this person in your life. And even though you know they're not good for you, you're afraid of missing out. And then also you will always want to accentuate what's good about them to justify you still being. And then you hope of winning their validation back. So when you get to that part where you see where it's a loss of self, and then you almost feel like you're addicted to this person, you're on your way to being in a trauma bonded relationship. Yet again, these things are really important. And like I said, so this is the end of part 1. Really important because we have to understand what really takes place in relationships. Healthy relationships aren't just about what you could do for me, not just about money, right? It's not just about all that sappy stuff people do, that you see on TV. That's not what relationship is all about. So when we talk about being in a healthy friendships or healthy relationships, as you can see, a lot of mental and emotional work has to take place. So next week, as I get into part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about Stockholm Syndrome and how that relates to trauma bonding, the 5 stages of accepting that you're in a trauma bonded relationship, and how that affects your mind, and then how we pull out of it. How do we pull out of a trauma bonded relationship? So before I go, I want to once again thank you for continued support. I get a lot of feedback about the podcast. You might see the numbers on there and may not, it is what it is, but I get a lot of people telling me how helpful it is. And yet again, if you want to reach out and be a guest on the show, you can email me at jonathan@beauregardtherapy.com. You can check me out on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor. And I'm going to return next week for part 2 of Are You in a Trauma Bonded Relationship? And then we'll finish up on that episode and continue. So once again, this has been Indestructible Souls. I want to thank you for joining me, and we're out.